Hey there, my name's Curtis Lucas and you're watching Empire Building. So finally, after a nail-biting weekend, we finally are seeing some signs of hope. That good old hopium. That Bitcoin just maybe, just might be back on track. I'm not gonna lie, this last few months has really actually tested my resolve, especially these last couple of weeks. The fact that we saw traditional support levels fail time and time and time again, it began to get me wondering if maybe this time it is different. Just not how we thought it would be. Now don't get me wrong, I never wavered for a moment that Bitcoin was going to become a part of our future. I just thought that as far as these cycles are concerned, things were looking very different this time around. I have to say, for anyone who is new to the space and hung through this and stuck through this experience, you've gained something that usually takes a whole lot longer to acquire. What it's like to sit through a 50+% drawdown in the price. Now, it's not quite the same thing, so I'd say you're honorary members by now, but it's a whole nother thing when you suffer through that and then a prolonged 2 to 3 year bear market. Of course, still, anything can happen. The difference here is, while we certainly did hear our fair share of the narrative where Bitcoin is dead, yet again, this time we do see the narrative has just started to shift. So we're going to talk about that in this episode because a lot happened today, as most of you already know. And then we'll try and get some perspective on where we might be headed. So let's just get into this video. So from the close of the market on Friday, we saw Bitcoin's price definitely seem to take a turn for the worse. And just when we thought things were getting a little bit better, it got worse still. Bitcoin plunged all the way down to approximately $31,000. But as it turns out, the bulls did show up and we managed to form a higher low. And not only that, we have bullish divergence on the RSI indicator. As far as technical analysis goes, these two things are very promising. And the recovery that we witnessed following that was quite substantial. But that wasn't really what convinced me that this is most likely the bottom. What convinced me was that in the media, the narrative had clearly shifted. We started seeing news articles like Ray Dalio being bullish on Bitcoin. Not only that, he owns some of it. He said that as far as an asset class is concerned, he would rather hold Bitcoin in an inflationary environment than he would bonds. And who can blame him? He even admitted that he actually owns some of it already. For those of you who don't know, Ray Dalio is an American billionaire, investor and hedge fund manager who served as the co-chief investment officer for the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. He's about as old school as they come. This is almost the equivalent of someone like Warren Buffett warming up to Bitcoin. Not that that's ever going to happen. And then we had Goldman Sachs coming out and proclaiming to the world that Bitcoin is officially a new asset class. Well, it only took them 12 years, but better late than never. Of course, it always does seem a little peculiar the way the news cycle tends to work around investments. You always have the cycle of positive news, turn to bearish news, turn back to positive news. You never really get a nice mix of informed information. It's just article after article that just piles onto the same narrative until they've beat that down enough and then they simply switch. I don't necessarily think that this is a definitive sign of manipulation. Honestly, I think it's just a matter of publishers trying to get clicks. The fact of the matter is these publications get paid based on advertising. So their objective is not to tell you what's relevant. Their objective is simply just to get you to click. And that motivation, I think, is what leads to this type of relentless cycle. The difficult part about it is you never truly know when they've had enough. But here we are. And Bitcoin and many of these other investments are at far more attractive levels than they have been since the beginning of 2021. We've basically reset the clock, so we get to start all over again. Now, I want to stress that I'm not entirely convinced that we are fully out of the woods here. I do think we stand to see a substantial rise from here in a relatively short period of time, but I don't think we're headed straight back up to all-time highs. I do think that's going to take some time. There is a lot of people that got completely wiped out as a result of the events that took place over the last few months. People that got overly leveraged and overly aggressive lost a fortune. And most likely, they're not coming back. At least, not for a while. Now, having said that, it does appear that the narrative of institutional investors hasn't died. It does appear that, at least for the bulk of the selling pressure, did originate from institutional investors. So this narrative of them being the diamond hands doesn't actually appear to have rung true in this case. If institutional investors were meant to mature Bitcoin's market, well, they've done a much worse job at it than the retail investors ever have. But here we are. And then lo and behold, right before the end of the trading day, the prices suddenly spiked with a massive increase in volume. A clear indication something just happened. And who else could it be? None other than Elon Musk. Spoke with North American Bitcoin miners. They're committed to publish current and planned renewable energy usage and to ask miners worldwide to do so. Potentially promising. Shortly after that, we find out from Michael Saylor that it was him who had hosted the meeting between Elon Musk and the leading Bitcoin miners in North America. He says the miners have agreed to form the Bitcoin Mining Council to promote energy usage transparency and accelerate sustainability initiatives worldwide. He goes on to say that executives from Argo Blockchain, BlockCap, Core Scientific, Galaxy Digital, Hive Blockchain, Hut 8 Mining, Marathon Digital Holdings, and Riot Blockchain were all present. And of course, following this, each and every single one of those public companies had chimed in. This was extremely refreshing to see that finally this narrative was beginning to shift. Of course, for those of us that have been deeply rooted and deeply involved in this space, we've already done all of our research, and none of this really is new information to most of us. But as it turns out, perception matters. And obviously, simply being mentioned by Elon Musk draws a lot more attention to this space. If nothing else, I think that Bitcoin mining companies have been flying under the radar as of recently. I mean, they've gotten a little bit of attention due to the meteoric rise, but people didn't actually understand what it is they did, how they make money, and just simply weren't paying attention to them. The difference is now, everybody's noticed. And I happen to believe that some of these people, after being informed about these companies, are going to look further into them. And they'll realize that this is yet another way to gain exposure to this space. And the reality is, the opportunity here is enormous, as we already know. Even though, in my opinion, for the most part, this issue had been addressed by Bitcoin, it's something that is probably going to continue to resurface. Until people understand what it is mining does for Bitcoin, they are going to continue to view Bitcoin's energy consumption as a negative. But that's something that this council, in some way, shape, or form, may be able to help with. It'll be interesting to see what or how they go about doing that. But anything they can do to get that message right is going to help. I also couldn't help but notice that at least some of the people on Twitter happen to point out that when meetings such as these take place behind closed doors, it usually doesn't end well for anything in Bitcoin. We do have instances of this in Bitcoin's recent past that really highlighted that. But Michael Saylor had made it clear that this council isn't there to make any decisions about Bitcoin's programming or any changes whatsoever. The purpose of this council is simply to help improve the transparency and the ESG initiatives that all of these North American miners are working towards. And yes, it's true that there's really no other industry out there that has been pressured and succumbed to actually doing this. Bitcoin, as far as I know, is probably the first. But in the interest of transparency, that is relatively consistent with some of Bitcoin's core principles. So all around, mostly positive things. And who knows what's going to come out next. As gut-wrenching as it's been for the last little while, this is what it's like to invest in this technology. Keeping a level head is easier said than done, even for myself. I've been through a lot of these cycles already, and it's still hard to get through them. So if you yourself managed to survive this, then congratulations. You're earning your stripes. That's all for this one. Now let's get back to empire building.